Something that's interesting about the consumer space right now is that we operate in a world where there's a lot of privilege, at least in our first world. And I think at some level, because we don't remember the dirty 30s, and we've never had to go out and actually forage for our own food, or we don't have this farming memory because we're a generation removed from the farm. I think in a way, we can't justify in our brains, maybe subconsciously, how to indulge and continue to indulge the way we do. So we're kind of guilt-ridden aspirational consumers. And there's 2.5 billion of us in the world. So we really like to shop, but we don't want to feel guilty about it. So we want to continue to indulge. So in order to do this, we like to kind of bundle ourselves or associate with brands that appear to alleviate our guilt in a little way, in somewhat of a way. So what we do is we like to buy things, food in particular, for what's not in them, rather than for what is. So this is kind of the strange world we operate in. And there's also weird perceptions around how we produce our food and about science more generally. And this is Carl Sagan's one of my favorite people in the world, and I always like his quotes. And I think that this quote in and of itself kind of says a lot. And it was kind of, he obviously, I wrote this in 1995, so quite a while ago, but he still saw this coming. And this is not changing. This is kind of the world that we live in. And we're still superstitious. There's a lot of pseudoscience that pushes us, and there's a lot of reasons why that happens, and we all know social media is a great part of this. So I'll talk about that a little bit. This is just a visual about the world that we operate in. I find it fascinating. You know, uncertainty is the trigger point. When people don't understand something, you know, they have to process it in their minds. And if they don't have any information to fill it, and someone comes in with a good story to fill it, it's sellable. They'll buy it. They like it, they absorb it, and it's hard to remove it from their psyche. And there's always behavioral responses that come from that. But the problem is, what we get out of it is we get a lot of misinformation shared. There's a lot of bad policy that can come out of it. And the other thing is social license is affected. And social license means that you as scientists are impacted in terms of how you can do your business, how you can do your craft. And it also affects businesses too. So these are some of the, this kind of is a showcase of some of the controversies that we all see. The headlines, there's always something new in the headlines every day. And I think you've all seen some of these. It's always interesting. And you know, at the end of the day, are we looking at a war on science? In some ways. People have always been a little skeptical of science. There was a time there where they, because science, it has to be objective and removed from society in order to study it. We've always stayed removed from society. And the problem is that creates problems as well. But also over a period of decades, there were perceptions out there that science has become more privatized. So even if you do your science in the public sector or in universities, there are still these perceptions that go with science around this, that it's privatized. So what we have now with the onset of, you know, social media is we have a lot of misinformation out there and this perception that there may be a war on science. And this is the problem here. Factually incorrect beliefs can really form the basis for some pretty bad policy out there. And policy, and I don't mean just policy in terms of, you know, in the government, but also organizational or business policy. And also the societal, those decisions that really affect societies. And this often runs counter to really society's best interest. Often do. We see these problems a lot. So communicating science in this really complex world that we live in is a bit of a challenge. Why do some people believe the way they do? Why do we believe the way we do? Where and how do people connect today, and why does this matter to us, and why do we need to pay attention to this? And how do we reach audiences in meaningful ways, in ways that matter to them? So these are the three things I'm going to cover today, and I invite you to ask questions during, if you want, put up your hand, let me know. I'm happy to respond to them, and we can do some after. But I'm going to, in amongst all of this, I'm also in the third section, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the company, Monsanto, is trying to do. And the reason why I'm showcasing this is that I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm trying to show you that what they've had to do to break their traditional communication strategies and their approaches to come out and do things that are different, just because of this environment we work in. And maybe it'll stimulate some discussion, some ideas around other ideas that you have about how science can and should be communicated in a meaningful way to audiences. First of all, I want to start with something. I want to get an idea of disciplines in here, and I might need some help with that. So, break down, okay, are you all scientists? Mostly? Is there any from humanities or business communications or...
Get some.
Thank you, okay, my peeps.
Yeah, the hippies are over there.
They what?
The hippies are over there.
Yeah. So is it, like, can someone just talk about what their disciplines are? Can you just speak out about them? We got scientists, but is there other disciplines that should be thinking about? Microbiologists, plant pathologists, geneticists. Okay, we're good. Okay, I just want to get engineers. Okay, excellent. Okay, I just want to get a sense of who's in the room, and I'll explain that later. So, why is science never enough? Well, this is the big one right here. It's because of our quirks as human beings. Now, I'm going to preface all this by saying the human animal is my favorite animal. I love humans. They're amazing. They're fascinating. They make great friends. And they also make interesting enemies, depending on what side of the where you're on there. But the first thing is we're conspiratorial thinkers. I think we all know this, right? It's kind of nature. But the reason we do this is because if something uncertain happens out there, we do not know how to explain it. We don't know how to deal with it. We fill that space with a story. And the conspiratorial stories are kind of fun. They make for interesting conversations. You can be the fun person at the party with the interesting factoid, whether it's true or not. It is a fascinating way in which the human being tries to deal with something that they feel absolutely powerless over. It's quite simple. The problem is that, and how this relates back to science, well, we know science and technology are moving at a pace that society can't keep up with. So as soon as something's out there that we're proud of, that we've developed, that we think can really change the world in terms of food or whatever, it's out there, we're excited about it, but then the public goes, oh my gosh, what does that mean? And if we haven't properly filled in that gap in terms of understanding and communicating, there will be someone else that'll have a good story. And it'll be a great story. And it'll be really hard to remove that story from the culture. The other thing that we do is we are pattern seekers. Another very human response, right? We constantly seek out risk. This is how we've survived. We would not be here if we weren't risk seekers. So we like to find meaningful patterns and meaningless noise. And Cami Ryan, I don't know if you know this book or not, but it's a fascinating little book on, he has a collection of correlations, which are really illustrative of why correlation doesn't mean causation. But this is what we tend to do. We'll find a pattern and we'll see things going on and we'll assume that there's some sort of connection when there's probably none at all. It's very much what we do. It's like type 1, type 2 errors. It's sort of like you see the bush shaking, so you think, oh, saber-toothed tiger, I'm going to run away, and you survive. But what if it was just the wind, right? So we like to think in pictures. I took this picture a couple of weeks ago, and I took it of this pepper because I thought he was interesting, but then I thought, gee, that one in the back is kind of interesting too, because he looks like he's chasing him. We visually organize and process information in our brains in this way. We kind of link up the emotional and the creative elements of our brain. That's kind of how we work, and that's why we respond to anything that's really visual. So we're hardwired to find things where things aren't. And this is a good example of that. Frankenfood, for example, which you've probably heard that term, it's been around since 1993. It's pretty pervasive, but it's also, it's not only visual from a word perspective, it conjures up that Mary Shelley novel and those visuals that have been presented in there in pop culture. So it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving, dare I say. And that's an example too of something that's really visual. It's just a word. It's a word. It has a connotation in the public's mind. One of the neatest things is we like to confirm our biases. All of us. And all of us are biased. And I think I checked out, at one point, I think there were about 140 different biases that have been identified by neuroscientists. And what this means is we like to seek out information that confirms our worldviews. So if we are given a factoid or a piece of information that actually literally shakes the ground under our sacred cows, we'll just ignore it and go back to the information that we know. That's how we operate, because that's a safe space for us. It's a place we understand, and it's very comfortable. Connected to this is we like to conform. Personal networks are really important in our life. Just think about it. So you connect with your work, your family, online, on Facebook, whoever. This is a very important part of our world. We're greatly influenced by our networks around us, and we acquire knowledge through those networks. But the problem is we also get into those echo chambers where we can get our biases confirmed. So all of these things link together. And it comes up with what I think it's actually Khan that talks about tribal entanglements. So while tribes, being with groups, helps us to survive in a way, and that's very much a human survival mechanism, it also keeps us in that group think, and sometimes it needs that disruption in order to help us step outside thinking, whether we're an organization or anything. So another complicating factor in all this, of course, is social reach. That has really changed over the last 10 years with the onset of the internet. Look at this. Since 2005, Twitter use has gone up exponentially, and we have 75% at this point, 75% of North American adults all own a smartphone. That's where we get a lot of our information, and almost immediately, and on the first page or two of a Google search. That's how we connect. The human-to-human interaction model has absolutely fundamentally changed. We exchange more online than we probably do in real life now. And this really affects the kind of information that's put out there. In 1992, a cultural sociologist developed this number based on a study of military groups, ancient villages, and cultures. It came up with a number, 150. And basically he says 150 is the number of people that we can cognitively manage in our brains at one time and keep track of. 150, max, around that. Now, since the onset of the internet, there's been some more research. And Dr. Barry Wellman from the University of Toronto and his team did some work in 2012. And he estimates that now that we have the social media and those connections with social platforms, that cognitive capacity to contain is up past 600. Now what we have to do is we have to think about, a story shared on social media. What happens to that? Well, it's sort of like having a snowball roll down the hill. It gains momentum, it gains mass, and it can get pretty messy at the end. So this is kind of a very visual way of looking at what the impacts of a bad story can be, or bad information, and what the effects are in our world, and how this can really affect our social lives. So I was really pleased when, in 2015, the World Economic Forum, so it's a pretty significant group of, or organization, they identified digital misinformation as one of the main threats to human society. I think sometimes we're aware of the problem, but to actually have organizations literally say it and say that it matters. And it doesn't mean that other things don't matter, because of course they do. But this is something that is almost like an epidemic. And it's a problem, and we have to address it. And this is what affects our ability to do our work. Something else that I think is important to address, and given that the group that's from here was citation needed, is everybody aware of predatory journals? Everybody? Yeah, okay, great. Because I find that I often talk to groups and there's a lot of people that don't know about it. And in fact, we've got very good scientists at Monsanto, but they've missed this one too a couple of times. So we're trying internally to make sure that we keep everybody on their toes around this. I can't believe how much the numbers have gone up just in a few years from 2010. 420,000 articles in 2014, estimated. Predatory journals are in every field or discipline. And from a company standpoint, the articles that have caused us probably the most grief, 75% of the articles, like say, including cerealine, but cerealine is in food and chemical toxicology. Pretty legit, not retracted though. But some of the journal articles that caused us the most grief, 75% of them have been in predatory journals. But they still make it through to the media, because that's how it goes. That's science by press conference, I call it. So this is an issue that I think we need to keep an eye on. So not only do we have like digital misinformation that's problematic, we also have predatory journals. And I think automatically people assume, oh, it's in a journal, so it must be good. Not necessarily. This is about peer review. And the predatory journal is actually, what's most problematic about it is the fact that there's often not any peer review. It's, and I resist saying pay-to-play model because pay-to-play is very much a part of publication and has been. But this one's about no peer review and pay-to-play. So they're very much about the check. And that really kind of undermines the quality of the work we're trying to do. It's a problem. So here's the other thing. We've got all of this complex space. We got the media in there. I could probably done another hour-long talk about the media, because the media is very interesting. How do we reach audiences in meaningful ways? It's pretty tough. Even if it's just a simple issue, how do we reach them so that it matters, so that it connects, so that we can connect? It's a tough thing. I'm going to share with you a few things that we've done as a company, and mostly because I think that it represents something out of the ordinary. I find that in this space, with science, when we're trying to communicate, some of the most powerful things that we can do is pick a strategy that is pleasantly unexpected to your audience. Surprise them with humor, with self-deprecation, with being in spaces that they totally don't expect you to be. So we're involved in a whole bunch of other things. This is just kind of an overview of that. One of the things that we and others in the industry, we support GMO Lancers. It's a really good space that has a collection of about 1,200 questions that have been answered by experts in their fields. So it's a really good resource. There's also educational resources on there. But I think probably more importantly, I'd like to talk about these other things that I think, personally, coming from the outside into this company that are really neat. So Dr. Bob Freel is our Chief Technology Officer at Monsanto, and he's built up a fairly good social media profile. I would probably, I know Rob, and I know that he enjoys doing it now, but I think at one point the thought of going in social media probably wasn't really something he was very interested in, but I think he really enjoys it now. He does all his own social media. The other thing is, I would guarantee you 5-10 years ago, he probably wouldn't have been writing on the Huffington Post blog. This is a new space, and probably the Huffington Post might have thought, what are you doing here? So this is something that's really interesting, and it's not only that he doesn't talk about Monsanto products. He talks about science. He talks about issues of food waste. He talks about how we should be driven by evidence and science rather than ideology. So he's trying to connect with audiences in ways that where they can see value. So it's not about selling a product. It's about preserving the good science. The other thing that we've done is we've engaged with our critics. And here's Dr. Donna Farmer. She is a toxicologist from Monsanto. And she went on the doctors, which was very brave because, again, we didn't know what to expect. The thing about daytime talk shows, and I've had a couple of colleagues that have gone on Dr. Oz and been sadly surprised by what's come out at the end of it, is that they can edit. And that doesn't always work in our favor, especially if whoever brings you and invites you to the table already has a bit of an agenda. So this worked out really well. Dr. Farmer was on there. She talked about glyphosate, and they asked the questions, and it was actually a pretty reasonable space. And they didn't edit out anything improperly. They had Jeffrey Smith there, who, this comes back to, media and false balance in media. I think that that's a good example. He's not a scientist, and actually Dr. Farmer pointed that out, because he's not a toxicologist. So that was probably kind of a point of departure here, but at least we showed up, and I think that that's the main thing. So whether you're a Monsanto, the most evil company in the world, or you're a scientist, sometimes you have to think about showing up in different spaces. Maybe places that maybe make you a little uncomfortable. You might want to lean into that discomfort a little bit and find out how you can connect with audiences in new ways. We tweet. We like to tweet. It's fun. I enjoy it. I've been doing it for about 7 or 8 years. And it's not for everybody, but it's a way to connect with people. I will tell you that there's several people in the room here that I have a connection with and probably just met today maybe. But this is why these matter. You connect online, and then all of a sudden you can meet up in real life, and it's just really great. It's an important part of relationship building. So this is something that you can do. And it doesn't always mean that you're tweeting about your business or your science necessarily. It's about humanizing your science and extending yourself in ways that people can relate to and find relatable. We also go on podcasts, and has anybody ever heard of Matt's Curl? He's our millennial engagement lead at Monsanto. He's quite an animated presenter, and he's gone on a lot of these because a lot of these skeptic podcasts tend to, appeal to the millennials out there. So he's been on there, and he addresses the big questions. Why does everybody hate Monsanto? So it's good. It's interesting. These are places again that we probably never would have been just a few years ago. The Intelligent Squares debate, they have these regularly. We had the opportunity in late 2014 to participate in one around genetically modified food. Do we genetically modify food? For the motion was Dr. Bob Freel, and he teamed up with Dr. Alison Van Unen from UC Davis. And then against the motion was Dr. Charles Van Broek, and he was with Washington State University at the time, and Margaret Mellon, who is with the Union of Concerned Scientists. We didn't know what was going to happen here either. So before they even do anything, before the debate even starts, they take a pulse of the crowd and they find out. And what they found was a kind of a 3-way split. 33 thought genetically modifying food is okay, 33 didn't really like it at all, and 33 were undecided. By the end of the evening, it's hard to tell where the vote swung, but it looks like we might have taken that undecided vote and pushed it over to going, you know what, genetically modified foods are okay. We probably, the ones that really didn't like it at the beginning, probably stuck to their guns there. But I think we moved the needle, and it was an interesting way. And the other thing is, you can go online and actually listen to this, and it's really good. The stories are excellent. And again, it enabled a connection between those that do science and those that need to understand it a little bit better. Someone was in the audience at Intelligence Squared. We all know who this guy is. So actually, this worked out really well. Bill Nye had written a book, and one of his chapters, I think it was chapter 8, was very skinny and very critical of genetic engineering. So what we did at that event, we took an opportunity, because he stood up and asked a question at the end. He asked a question for Bob Freel, and Rob ended up talking to him after, and we invited him to Monsanto. And he spent the day with us. And it wasn't just, it was a great day, because what he did was he met with people. We didn't sit and give him presentations. We sat and talked to him. We asked him what he wanted to know. We took him through the lab. He actually worked on some stuff. He and Rob did some projects in the afternoon. And he rewrote the chapter, and he published a new version of his book a few months later. So we feel that that was a bit of a win. And it's not about Monsanto. It's about the science, And Bill Nye he's a very influential guy. Bill Nye, the influential guy. And he has quite a following. So when he says something negative, people listen. So we want to make sure that, he had all the right information. And again, it's a risk. You don't know what they're going to leave with. You don't know what he's going to write. And at the end of the day, it's not about what he writes or doesn't write. It's about the fact that we open our doors. We're being open and showing what we do. The other thing that we're learning to do, this is a tough thing because I've worked with scientists for a long time, we're learning to turn things like this into something that may be a little bit more consumable. Adding some visuals, simplifying the words, trying to come up with ways so that people go, oh, I get it, without looking at the other thing and blurring out. So this is something that we're trying to improve. And this is actually what my team does in regulatory policy and scientific affairs. We try to take the science, and some of it's our own, but a lot of it's not necessarily our own, and we try to redevelop it in consumable ways so that we can share it with the public or someone else can share it with the public and get value out of it. Needless to say, we have a brave new world right now. It's significantly changed from what was going on 10, 20 years ago. And I would say, yes, we've got a lot of new technologies out there that have changed things. And people are kind of resistant to them, but I think also social media has played a huge role in all of this. So we're no longer science communicators, not in the traditional sense. We are integrative communicators. We have to come up with new and interesting ways to engage with the audience. So some of us, when we graduated with our PhDs or our masters in science 20, 30 years ago, we were just going to go out and practice, do our craft. Now all of a sudden you've got to start thinking, no matter where you go, if you're going for government, for a university, or for a company, you have to think, what role will communication have in my job? Because inevitably there will be some of it. So here's the thing, and I'm sure we've all heard this before. You got to tell your story. Stories are the best things. As soon as you sit down with someone, you find something relatable with them, or they share a story about themselves. Maybe there's a little bit of science in there, maybe there's not. I don't know, maybe you're a farmer and you want to talk about what you did with your kids on the weekend after you finished harvest. These are stories that matter to people, and people can find them relatable. And it's very powerful. There is Paul Zak is out of California, I can't remember which university, but he refers to himself as a neuroeconomist. It's the first time I ever heard of that, but anyway, whatever, it's there. But he actually studies the neurological responses to storytelling. And a story will have a beginning, a middle, and end, and you always have that crescendo and all of these different pieces. So a really good story, actually what happens is the listener's brain releases chemicals. And these are chemicals that actually help them trust the person telling the story. So a good story can actually build trust between the listener and the person telling the story. So there's a little bit of science around this. The other thing we have to avoid as scientists is the backfire effect. Always when we respond to a query, and maybe it's aggressive, maybe it's not aggressive, but we seem to want to just kind of respond with the facts. And what happens is that can just completely backfire, because human behavior will suggest that what happens is as soon as someone hears something that goes against their beliefs, they will ignore it and go back to the beliefs. In fact, sometimes they go further back. So this is what they refer to as the backfire effect. This is why we have to lead with the story and not the facts. And John Cook and Stephen Lewandowski is a friend of mine, he actually works at the University of Bristol. They wrote a 6-page book. If you can find this one, I just should read it. It's 6 pages, it's really quick, easy to read, got some pictures in it, because we all like pictures. And they say you can't debunk a myth without somehow replacing it with some other kind of narrative. Remember what I said about empty space? So if you debunk that myth, you have to be prepared for something to go in. Otherwise, people will just go and look for the next thing, the next interesting story that they can populate that space with. It's the only way I can think of to make it, explain it simply. But debunking has a series of steps in order to really make it work, and they outline them really well in there. Storytelling too, it's a path. It's not really a destination. I think sometimes we get caught up in the conversational win. So has anybody been in a difficult conversation and you just were like, oh my God, if they only understand what I was saying, you'll never get it. Has anybody ever done that? Yeah. You want to walk away from that conversation having these people go, oh, I get it. Yeah, let's be friends. This is great. I love your science. I think if we try not to get too caught up in that conversational win, we're more willing to re-engage again. It ends up, what it should be about is just asking them questions. Asking them why they get their information, why they think what they think they do. Like, probe those things. Share what your concerns are. Yes, I see what you're saying there, because this is what bothers me. You know, I mean, and oftentimes a conversational bit, well, it's all science is run by corporations, you know, big pharma, big ag. And I mean, I think it's legitimate to say, well, yeah, actually, you know, corporations are out there, and you know, we maybe have to keep an eye on them. You're just finding spaces where you can connect, and people can understand and relate. So it ends up being a way to reshape how you think, and then also helping other people to reshape how they think about science in a new way. The human interest story is always a great thing. But I think we've reached a whole new level where human interest story has to get human interesting. And here is a very good example. Jerry Hayes is a bee guy. He worked for the public sector, for the government down in Florida for many years as a bee expert. He joined the company probably about 6 months before I did. And I think I went and knocked on his door immediately because I loved finding somebody who was new to the company, just like I was, and I wanted to pick his brain. Anyway, if you haven't read this piece by Hannah Nordhaus in Wired, I really, really recommend it. I've known Jerry for almost 3 years, and I read this story, and I know the work that he's doing. I know what he's doing. He's passionate about it, but she dug in, and she found out a lot of interesting things about this man. And it's just a really good story. And these are the kinds of things we have to tell, because this is what people relate to. Yeah, they kind of want to hear what you're doing with the bees, and they want to know the bees are healthy and safe. But who are you, Jerry Hayes? And I think he's in there pretty good. Yeah, let me tell you a story. This is my story. So I told you about, I grew up in small town Saskatchewan. But it was about it was maybe 1994 or so. I was a single parent. I had no money. I was looking for a job. I was trying to keep food on the table. And I had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to go work for a graphic arts firm. And I had some graphic arts training at the time. Or I could go work at a lab greenhouse with a group of scientists. And these group of scientists were from the public sector, government, private sector, and I chose to go work with the scientists. I'm not sure what prompted me to go that way, but you know, I think actually it was close to our home or whatever. That might be one of the reasons. So I went and worked for this place. I made coffee. I was at the bottom of the totem pole, right? I made coffee. I autoclaved agar. I ordered lab equipment. I washed graduated cylinders. I did all of that stuff. And I did this for about 2 or 3 years. And they finally brought me in to do some communications work, actually. So it kind of comes full circle here, because I had this graphic art stuff, but I won't get into that. But the amazing part of this is that I built up a relationship with these scientists. I've never worked with scientists before. I didn't really understand what they were doing, not really. But I liked them. Our kids played together. We had parties together. We ran together. We did all sorts of things. This is what you do. You build up with your network, and your network influences you. Well, I ended up moving on from there. I went back to university, got all my degrees, and kind of moved on from there. But these people really influenced the direction that I took. They really did. The most interesting thing is, so this is my story and how I got there, and there's a little bit more to that as well. But the interesting part of all of this is that sometimes you're in a story and you don't even realize you're in a story. So you always have to be equipping yourself with the great thing that you're doing now, even if you think you're missing it. Because what I realized in hindsight is in 1996, I was working with these scientists that brought the first genetically engineered canola to the marketplace in Canada. That's a pretty significant part of Canadian agricultural history. I was just washing graduated cylinders. I didn't really realize I was part of anything special. I just had a job that I was getting paid to do. And I think that I certainly understand the relevance now, 20 years later, it's really important. But these are things that there may be things that you're doing now that you may think nothing about, but they're going to be stories that you can use later, even present. So, I'm going to conclude. When science isn't enough, you got to reach out to audiences in spaces where they interact. You got to go where they are. Don't wait for them to come to you, because you just got to be there. You got to be bold. You got to be fearless. You got to lean into the discomfort. And sometimes that's not always easy, but I guarantee you will be gratified at the end of it. Be responsive, and I think the most important thing is sometimes we have to anticipate the issues. We got to see things coming down the line. And when you're scientists, you kind of know what's coming. And you can sometimes step back from that and go, wow, how would I see this if I were my next door neighbor, my aunt, my grandma? Think about how it possibly could be viewed. And then talk with your colleagues about, gee, do we need to be paying attention to this and how we need to look at this or communicate? Do we need to network around this? Do we need to find ways to tell our story in a different way? I think something else that's really important is you got to tap into your networks and your resources. And the great thing now is when I first started reaching out over the topic of GMOs 7-8 years ago, there was a smattering of people around the world that were talking about this, but we weren't necessarily talking together. And now what's happened is there's a bit more critical mass, and everybody's kind of networked in. So if you're able to tap into those networks, you can probably get a lot of resources from people. Another little tactic that I use that has been very useful is if I feel compelled to post a blog that may be a bit vocal and that may get some pushback, I often say, hey, so-and-so, 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 I'm going to put this out, this afternoon. If you have time, do you mind paying attention to what the Twitter feed is about and maybe come in and provide some counterpoints or whatever. So don't be afraid to tap into your networks and make the most use of it that you can. People are your best resources. Identify gaps, like I said, but build bridges. And this is one of the most important things, and I will tell you this is one big reason why I'm working for Monsanto, this social scientist. I am there to build bridges because it's important for scientists, for the corporation to understand how people think and what's going on. So tapping into those disciplines in the humanities and the social sciences and understanding how they do their work and how their work can probably help us is really important. But the other thing is I think that at the academic level, there is something to be breaking down the silos between disciplines. So not just within the sciences, I mean more broadly speaking, because I think that there is expertise across the board that you can tap into. And once you network that in and you collaborate, you can find ways to problem solve that you might not be able to do on your own. Humanize the science. Tell your story. That is number one, the most important thing. And that's the thing we should always lead with, is that all-important story. So when you think about what you're doing every day, and it feels boring or not interesting or mundane, there's always a way to wrap a story around it. Thank you.
Okay, so at least in the horticulture department, as well as some of the other ones that are split between campuses, the tradition is to take questions from the opposite campus first.
Hello, opposite campus.
So I'm going to open it up. Eduardo, if you can still hear me, does anyone have any questions? And they're going to type it in, so it might be a little bit of a minute before we get anything.
Okay.
He's typing. I have no ellipses right now, so it's
Do we want to start off with one from here?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, maybe we can get it going from here. That's good.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is most exciting, having been in the genetic engineering at some point. But there's something that I don't know if you addressed and I missed it. People say that when the technology is really advanced, it looks like magic. And what I have found out is when somebody tries to explain to the average people that we can sequence 5 billion base pairs per minute today just by looking flashes of light, it's hard to anybody to comprehend. And you
I
can,
have no idea, what- yeah. I'm not there. I'm just-
the new super sequencers are, it seems like science fiction. And it's very hard for any scientist, to get to explain that now we can not get 1 micro but a lot and get all excited and not sound exactly like somebody that is going to tell you a story completely fictitious. You see, and when I read your title, Science is Not Enough, and that's exactly what I face myself almost every day. I'm amazed about science, I'm amazed about, the things, and I happen to be very eager to read and find out what it is, and I think I could explain the things if I had half an hour. But the average people today will give you the attention for about 30 seconds,
Yeah, no, it's fine.
if that much. And then if you compare what you can say in those 30 seconds and compare it to a fiction writer, it's exactly the same. And so all of this, I agree with you. But there's one thing that we're still missing and we don't do a good job, and that is the search for the truth.
So what do you mean by that?
We use all these tools, and at the end, we can argue about the science all you want, but science is uncertain.
There are no absolutes, and we have a public that wants absolutes, yes.
And you just told us, well, you substitute one myth with another. So if somebody's starting to believe, let's say, a non-truth, and you come with a truth that sounds just equally fictitious, it's going to be hard to make any meaningful advance. I know that you said humanize and tell the story, but at the end, that I worry about that way of convincing the people about what science is bringing and everything. I talk to Vaniniman all the time, and she brings very trite examples of things, and still people don't.
And there's no cookie cutter approach to this. I mean, clearly there isn't, because there's going to be different individuals in different contexts with different issues or questions, right? So that's what's problematic, and I think that's what makes it hard to step out and actually do it, because there's so many unknowns, right? It's scary for us from that perspective. So right now, it would be this. Okay, so I'm 51. My memory isn't what it used to be, and so I'm going to walk away from today. But I will always remember you. Do you know why?
Because I gave you cheese.
You gave me cheese! My gosh! I told you I love cheese. You gave me cheese. That was my value. I love cheese, and you found a way to connect to it. Now, I might not remember what you just said with base pairs and stuff. But see, I trust in you as your scientist, and I respect you, so it's all good. But I will remember the cheese. So, and this sounds cheesy, but really, the creativity, and this is why I say breaking down barriers between sciences and humanities and other disciplines, is that there's an opportunity there. Because I believe that part of addressing all these issues is using metaphors, finding ways to connect to people that paints pictures in their brains in meaningful ways. So if you can't physically be there and give them the cheese, how can you give them the cheese in another way? And that's where, maybe we got to talk to the linguists, we got to talk to the artists, we got to talk to these other people, because they know how to do that, right? I wish I had answers. I don't really, because I've been doing this a long time and there are none. I wish I could show you a slide that says, do this, you got her in the bag. I don't have it. And I don't think we ever will. It's kind of one of those unknowns and uncertainties.
What do you think the public reaction is going to be to the CRISPR Cas9 gene editing technology once it gets out into the public, that we're really editing the genetic material in plants all over the place? What do you think?
Well, you know what? I can't even begin to speculate on that. I don't know. Probably because, number one, I'm not in a position to even know enough about it to do. But what I see now, from my perspective as a science communicator, I see a lot of hype. And I will tell you that anytime any piece of science comes out and there's a lot of hype around it, I'm a little like, because sometimes it gets hyped up and that either turns it into, oh, it's not really that great, or it goes the other way and then people get scared. So I always worry about hype more than I worry about the technology itself. Can't really respond to that, I don't know. But I mean, it has some great possibilities. It seems like it's going to be good, but I think like anything else, as soon as there's something new in our world, people won't necessarily embrace it. They'll find ways. And there's also people out there that have an agenda to make things look bad as well. So, you know, creating villains. Do we need to take?
Yeah, so we actually got one from Worcester. This is from Eduardo. He said, I think it's pretty clear that changing the mindset of our current generation is very difficult. Has Monsanto done anything to target kids in middle school?
Questions. And I would say no. You know, that's probably not where we've gone. I think probably there's been some efforts, and I'm speculating here, but I think there's been some efforts to connect with teachers. Like I don't know if you know Janice personally, there's a whole bunch of people in Monsanto that are really out there and going into, they're meeting with food bloggers, teachers, and so forth. So I think that there is some effort on our part to try to do that. I think GMO Lancers is also developing some educational materials for middle school as well, because I agree, Eduardo, I agree, that I think that the young people need to have better resources.
Do you see a news blog that says Monsanto brainwashes middle school children?
Absolutely, because isn't that the next thing that comes?
No,
We're bad guys.
It's not outreach in the same way, but I do want to say that a friend of mine is a middle school teacher in Metro Washington, D.C., and she works at a charter school network there. And Monsanto actually annually has the 8th graders come to one of their research greenhouses on their dime. And they actually treat the kids with a lot of respect, and a lot of the kids that do not have the opportunities to get involved with R&D at any stage of their life actually walk away liking science, being interested in science, and kind of taking a new perspective on things. So Monsanto's actually doing that.
Well, thank you. And you know what, that reminds me too, that I think they do that out in Woodland in California, like with their vegetable greenhouses. Sorry, this lady back here.
So I'm in the plant pathology department. I'm a grad student. I'm also the chair of the grad student committee for our professional society. And I've been trying really hard the last couple years to galvanize the forces to get us to participate in social media, since we have scientific knowledge and understanding about modern technology, to participate with our networks and participate with strangers and tweet. And I get a lot of pushback and I meet a lot of hesitation. And I've been trying to figure out where this is coming from, and I think there are two main sources, and I think you might be able to address one of them. So the first one, I think, comes from our department, and it's sort of, we don't like to touch on hot topics, there's pushback from faculty, be quiet about that, don't make a scene. But the other thing is that we're warned a lot about our presence on social media before we get a job. And since this is a hot topic, if I get a whole bunch of grad students to go out there into this red zone and start talking, and then they apply for places that may not agree with what they're saying, I think that there's hesitation to be in the conversation. So
It's kind of a personal decision, right?
yeah. Well, you're also from Monsanto, so when you are hiring some of our grad students, do you look and see, oh, they tweeted anti-GMO? I mean, do you have any idea?
You know what, I don't know that what we do there. I mean, I don't even know what they've done around in my background there. But I think the reason why I got hired was because my voice resonated with what they already were saying. I mean, in some ways, I think I pushed the button a little bit too. But anyway, but I think that they felt that I was already doing something in a space that that was meaningful to them. So I'm not sure that they go out and look, but I had a fairly public profile before I went there. In fact, I probably might not have been on their radar necessarily, but I was, because I had a fairly high public profile. Those kinds of decisions about what you do, I think you do them the same reason I did it. I did it because I was passionate about it. And I always find that if you do what you love that feels right, and I always felt that what I was doing had an element of social justice behind it, because I don't like misinformation. I don't like people to make misinformed decisions. I don't like bad policy. I think that's unfair to societies. So that's what pushed me. And I really didn't care what anybody, like if someone was gonna discriminate against me based on that, I was fine with that. So I think that decision has to be it's personal. I think most people, when they're passionate about something, want to engage, and they're going to do it. But to the other point, the professional society. I have a colleague in Monsanto, and she's part of a committee for the American Chemistry Society, ACM. And she's trying to move them along in that area too, and she's hitting the same things. It's hard. I think it's the same thing. We've got Monsanto's a 100-year-old company. It took them a long time to go, whoa, we better start doing this thing, and they started. And sometimes those bigger organizations have a hard time moving, and maybe they'll get there. I think that the more that you do advocate for it, I think the more it will be out there. I think the decision makers, though, really, I hate to say it, but have been around a while, and they're just not interested in the space. So it's hard for them. So, push.
I'll probably take one more question, and then you'll be available afterwards to talk if there's any others.
One of the terms you use made me think, which is good, right?
Depends on what it makes you think about.
But you use the term bias,
Yes.
and you use it in a context which I think is realistic, because in reality we're all biased in some way. And yet, in society, being biased is a very negative thing.
Well, I guess it depends what the agenda is, right? It's subjective.
True, but I'm not
The
sure.
outcome's biased.
The question ultimately is, since we all carry a bias, someone that we are communicating with, especially if they have a bias in a different direction, it's going to find it very difficult to find me, with my bias, credible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, in my mind, the biggest challenge we have. How do we overcome that bridge?
Well, when I talked about humanizing, I think sometimes the fact that you share your biases and your willingness to, put it out there. Here's my bias. This is the deal. I worked with scientists for 5 years before I ever went into this business. I trust them. I have relationships with them. I was raised on a farm. I come from my own space and personal space. You're sharing that. And if I share that with someone, they'll go, well, she's biased. Well, yeah, probably. It's based on my experience. But I think that there is no doubt, no matter what, there is no perfect person out there that doesn't have bias. It's just there. I just think being honest about what our biases are and sharing at the end of the day is the important thing. I think first and foremost in all of this, no matter what you do, you got to value the relationship before anything else. Because I personally have done this for a long time, and my voice has changed over the years. Like I maybe was a little bit caustic at the beginning, and then I went, nah, it's not working for me. I don't feel very good about this, so I'm going to shift how I deal with things. And going into any circumstance where you're going to have a little bit of conflict, as it happens, we're humans and we get into conflict about different things, spouses, sisters, brothers, kids, whatever. I think that it's not about the conflict. It's about the relationship. So if you're focusing on relationship and just building that, even if you don't get acceptance from the other side or buy-in, I don't think that should be the ultimate goal anyway. It should be about the connection. People can connect and still not agree. I have a Facebook network has everything from left-wing, liberal, artsy academics, all the way to right-wing, Christian, conservative ranchers and farmers. I'm very careful about what I put about politics on my Facebook page, so, because I don't want to get into it. But I have a very diverse crowd, and I have good relationships in my networks. We don't agree on everything. I would just flat out say, we don't agree on a lot of things, but that doesn't matter. We find other ways to connect. At the end of the day, people who are against science don't really want to know about the science. They just want to know whoever's doing the science is a good person. So I think at the end of the day, just go out there and be a good person and connect and value the relationship first.